Howdy, y'all, and welcome to the EEARSS Podcast, produced by Terrier TV. I am just one, Alligator Rob. This is Bill Curtis and Miss Cindy. How are you guys doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, yeah.
It is a wonderful day in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're on
Mr.
Sesame
Rogers.
Street. Yeah,
That's right, coming back from summer and getting back to it.
yeah, buddy. It's episode 2 of season 2.
Mm-hmm.
We're jumping right into it,
Absolutely.
getting after it. Stuff's getting done. Feeling accomplished.
This is
You're a real go-getter today,
Hey,
Frank.
that's where it's at. I am running on so little sleep. I think in the past 4 days I've maybe slept 9 hours. So it's been nonstop. Had the golf tournament in Chicago. Then you're doing that with a bunch of first responders, and the first responders get a little bit out of control.
Really? You don't say.
Yeah,
I'd never heard that before.
They get a little out of control in a great way, which is the whole idea behind the event, is to get their mind off all the different things they've been through. So a lot of the different guys it's guys from literally that were ground zero at 9/11 on. I mean, things that are school shootings, you name it, they've been through it, and
right.
it's a good way to get their mind off of it all. So it's it continually humbles you. Legitimately, just hear it. Some of them will open up to you and kind of tell you their story, and man, you share a nice cry. There's zero shame. You share a good cry. There was a guy up there that I met this time around. I've met him many times. His name's Wayne Medzer. He sings the national anthem at all the Cubs games, and he starts off this Canal Shores every time singing the national anthem. And he was asking me my story because I guess he didn't know it, which a lot of people don't. It's fine.
Right.
And I was telling it to him, and he's like, "You caught a gator in Chicago?" And I said, I did. And he goes, "Well, that's pretty neat. Well, how'd that story keep going?" And I said, "Well, it kept going because I had heart surgery, and the city of Chicago bailed me out. It was like one thing after another. It makes me understand why I was put in the situation." And he started crying. I said, "Wayne, what's going on?" He goes, "Well, it's kind of funny you say that. I sing for a living. I do music and sing for a living. And 5 years ago, I got robbed at gunpoint, and the guy shot me in the throat." And he's like, I figured my singing days were done. And, he was able to pull it back together, start singing again. And he was talking about how he had just went to prison and went and had a meeting with the guy and forgave the guy for what he had done.
Oh, wow.
So, man, talking about a tearjerker, that was a tearjerker. Amazing story. Pretty incredible, but again, I'm going to get all emotional just talking about it. Pretty cool stuff.
You have an ability to connect with people like nobody I have ever met. People share things with you that...
I like to wear my heart kind of on my sleeve. And, when you do that, I think people realize that. And, you just start kind of having these genuine discussions. You do the same thing every day. So I'm not sure what you're talking about. You really do. You do the same thing every day. You have a genuine discussion with someone, and people want to talk to you about things. So it's the way it works out. But anyhow, let's get into our guest today. I'm very super excited about.
I can tell that you're excited because you're not looking at a notebook.
Yes, no, I have no.
You have no notes.
Every
He has no need for that.
Every guest I have, I put notes in a notebook, and I have questions I ask them. I don't even need that for this guest. I'm that excited. So today we are joined on the podcast by a legitimate legend in the reptile world, and the word legend doesn't even sum it up close. Right. But a legitimate guy who's been there since the what's a real fancy word for beginning? I don't know. Since the very
onset.
That's fancy enough.
I don't know.
There's a word with an E
You're
that's really
asking
fancy.
me for fancy.
Anyhow, Mr. George Van Horn, who is the director of the Reptile World Serpentarium. Mr. George, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Frank.
Tell us a little bit about your profession.
Well, as you know, and my friends and family, when I was a child, 3, 4, 5, my father, he had been in the Army Air Corps during the Second World War. In fact, he was a nose gunner on B-24s. And he got transferred to Miami when I was 6 months old. And so I grew up there, and we were in a little house near the Miami River, and there were lots of critters back then. It was a different world. In fact, when I was a child, I don't think Miami had anything bigger than a 2-lane road. Air conditioning had not been invented, to my knowledge.
Oh.
And neither had lawns, which was a wonderful thing. That was a disaster right off the bat. I mean, all these people, putting out the green grass with the lawn chemicals, killing off our wildlife and poisoning people and poisoning our aquifers. And they still do it,
Yep.
But back then, when we would go visit a home, it would be, a wooden structure, probably set up off the ground, big screen porch. And the natural vegetation was still in place. When they would build a house, they would come in to get a lot, clear a spot, build a house. Might be a walkway up to the front door and a place or two to park a car. That was it. And we kids, they would drive us to somebody's home for a visit. The adults would be in the house fixing dinner. And I think back then there was even a lot of Cuban influence in the cooking, and it was just, we'd be out in the yard looking for critters. And all these wonderful aromas would be coming out of the home. And we children, you were hungry all the time back then. We didn't have bags of chips or, there was no McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut. Man, we were hungry. When you were kids back then, you were hungry all the time. And the smell of all this wonderful food would be wafting out of the windows, and we would be ready for dinner. Whatever they put down, it was wonderful. And but on occasion, I would encounter a snake, and that just became, to me, the coolest. I mean, when I would see a snake, it was like, I can't even describe the feeling. And at the age of 6, my mother had enlisted me in the Cub Scouts, and we went on a field trip to the Miami Serpentarium. A lot of young herpetologists don't even know about that place, but it was, Bill Haast, he was a pioneer in the Venom field, and all of a sudden I walk in this place, and here's a guy who works with snakes all day. I didn't even know that was possible. And he had this beautiful place, beautiful snakes, and then I found out about the venom. I didn't even know there was such thing as venomous snakes until I walked in the Serpentarium. And then Mrs. Haast, she was so dramatic in the way she would describe, her husband, Bill, he would be working snakes, and I saw he'd pick up a cobra and it'd bite, and venom went in the thing, and I thought, oh my God, this is the coolest thing on planet Earth. I still think that. But, from there, it was just a series of just fabulous luck. I had so much help, so many times I'm in the Serpentarium, and I still work the register occasionally, and people will come in, and I'll see a guy will be standing in front of me, and I can look in his eyes, and we start talking, and I can see that he had my dream, but I got it, and I know that feeling. And anyway, that was it. It was a series of just, my first assistant, who was with me for many years, she passed away, but she always said that my motto was blunder through. I never planned anything. I was poor at, I'm not a businessman by any stretch of the imagination, but, I keep just doing things to try to make something happen, and ended up in a wonderful place. The hard part for me now is watching what we're doing to the world. It's just painful, because, when I was a kid, I got to see the Everglades before, they were working on draining it when I was a kid. But we went out, and it was just, we were in these beautiful cypress hammocks, cypress trees with buttresses, huge, and waiting around, catching snakes. And I always thought it would be like that. And I never, at that age, thought that there was going to be any, that the world was always going to be like it was. And now I'm just watching what we're doing to it. And, I always tell the visitors of the Serpentarium how much I admired the Native Americans. I know they had a lot of problems, but, when I was a child, they gave me the same story they probably gave you about this wonderful man, Christopher Columbus. He sails across the ocean blue, and he discovers America. well, what a crock, right? I mean,
Right.
then you find out there were already millions of people here, and they were taking much better care of this continent than we ever have. They had it for 17,000 years, and we got here, it was beautiful. I mean, I was reading about the Chesapeake Bay, and back in the early 1800s, and they said it was just like a miracle of nature. It was, they would arrive there, and they were like blown away by the beauty. And we just, I think the Native Americans, and I find this with many indigenous people when I've traveled around, is that they have this innate sense of responsibility to nature. They somehow know, without anybody having to tell them, that nature is responsible for our very existence. And when you abuse it, you're going to end up where we're ending up now, which is, we're at a very dangerous place, not both with our environment and with our politics, which, I go into that a lot at the Serpentarium. My family says, you can't talk about these things. People come here to see snakes. But it all works together. There's not one thing. I mean, you screw up one thing, you're kind of screwing up everything.
Yeah, everything is interconnected. We are part of nature. Nature is not something separate from us.
Exactly.
So you were saying, that early interaction you had at the Miami Serpentarium. How did you first start working for Bill down there? How did that interaction come about?
That is a long story, man.
Well, I remember one time you telling me about how you guys used to camp out in there and stuff.
I used to camp out behind the Serpentarium. I used to spend the weekends there. And that went really good until my, whatever it is, had me climbing over the wall at night and Bill Haast catching me crawling around in the rattlesnake pit,
No.
That was a bad day. I was with my friend Billy Mickleberry. He became a writer. He's out in Hollywood. He's written a couple of good movies. But we were snake boys. We were Bill Haast snake boys at the time. And we decided we were going to go in and we were going to practice, with the snakes. And it was a misty evening. There was a very light rain, and we go in. We had snake bags, we had hooks, everything. We're in the snake pit. We're picking up rattlesnakes. Fortunately, it was a rather chilly evening. The rattlesnakes were.
How old are you at this point?
I was 12 or 13.
Oh my goodness!
Somewhere in there. And all of a sudden, here's Bill Haast. We lean over the thing. I'm not going to say what he said, but it was pretty much, get the hell out of here and don't ever come back. And which, he was God to me.
Oh.
I can't begin to tell you. And we were camped out back, and no sooner we got out there, and Mrs. Haast comes out, and she says, "Oh, boys, we were about to bring you some food," which would have been great because we weren't really good at fixing anything to eat. We were starving. And anyway, that made me feel 10 times worse. And anyway, the next morning we collect our stuff and we start walking down US 1 trying to flag down a Greyhound bus or something to get home. And we were so hungry. We were going into the palmettos, and I don't know if you know about this, but you can go in and pull out those little young palmetto leaves, and on the end there's a little piece of heart of palm about that long. We were eating that. We were really
pretty
starving.
tasty. Yeah.
And
when you're hungry, it's very
Billy
tasty.
Mickleberry saved us. He said to me, he says, "I figured out what the E stands for." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Yeah, the E, William E. Haast." I said, "Well, what does it stand for?" He said, "Ebenezer." And as soon as he said that, it broke the spell. We started laughing, and we were able to go home, and then we wrote many letters to Bill Haast, and finally he forgave us. And
did it take quite a while?
I can't remember. A day was a long time back then.
Oh yeah, when you're 13, yeah.
We were kids.
So how long after that did you start working for him again?
Well, that was a long saga too, because what happened was, as soon as I graduated from high school, I joined the Army, and I went in and I did a tour of duty in Vietnam, which was just a hell of an education about life and government and politics. That was probably one of the most powerful lessons I ever got, humanity-wise as well, because at our base camp we had Vietnamese. I was trying to learn to speak Vietnamese, and so every once in a while I'd get invited to a Vietnamese home. And I would go there, and I would see, I remember this woman. She was one of the servers in our chow line. And I got there, a wonderful woman, fixed a beautiful dinner, but she had ducks living under her bed, you see. I mean, it was a whole different way of life that made me realize that, there was a lot more to the world than the United States of America. And anyway, when I got home, and my mother, she was big on education, and I wanted to get a college education, I think, deep down inside. So I signed up at Miami-Dade, and I bombed out in about 3 weeks. I did great for about 2 weeks and bombed out. So I ended up, had a job with there was a carpenter named Willie Farmer. He was a big black dude. He was about 6'2", wonderful gentleman. But I was his carpenter's helper. He was a union carpenter in Miami, and I met him because he did jobs for my grandmother. And we'd be working somewhere. We'd be down in Liberty City or maybe up in Fort Lauderdale. But when we'd knock off for lunch, we could not go to a white man's restaurant. I actually experienced segregation as a teenager, as a youth, and it was it was terrible. I mean, what could I say, to Willie? And anyway. He always knew a good place, so he'd always know a house somewhere. I remember there was a place called Mother George's, and we would go there, around noontime, and there would be wonderful women in there fixing wonderful food, and for $2, they were doing it to make money on the side, and we'd have these wonderful lunches, but still it was terrible. Segregation was terrible, and we still sort of have it to a degree. I know I have a lot of people that would disagree with that, but we're still messed up. Anyway, I saved up some money, and I decided I was going to buy a Jeep, and I was going to drive to South America and go snake hunting. And I had a very close friend.
That's amazing in its own right.
Right.
Just the
friend.
idea.
Huh?
Just the idea of that is awesome.
Yeah, but my friend Mike Hamilton, he was on submarines. He was in the Navy. And he was stationed on Key West, and his family had moved to the Bahamas, and his house, which was about a block from where I grew up, was empty. And every weekend he would drive up in his GTO, and we would party in this empty house. And one weekend he came up, and he had a Polaroid picture. I wish I had it. And it was an old Rio Gold Comet model bus. It was an old retired school bus. I think it had been used for migrant workers as well. It was painted white, and it was sitting on the side of the road, and it had a for sale sign in the window. And I started thinking, wow, a bus, So I called the number, and it was an attorney. He had an office in the courthouse in downtown Miami, and I called up, and I made an appointment. I went in there. His name was Ralph Bearden, Jr. And I went in the office, and I said, Mr. Bearden, sir, I'd like to buy that bus. And I said, how much would you like for it? And Mr. Bearden, he looked at me. He said, well, I was thinking about $1,000. And I said, well, gee, I'm so sorry to have wasted your time. I said, I only have $250. And I turned to walk out of the office, and he grabbed me on the shoulder, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, sold. So I bought this whole Rio bus. It took me 3 days to get it home. I parked it. We had an empty lot behind our house in El Portal, and I parked the bus and started working on it. And everybody in the neighborhood, slowly but surely, the rumor got out, George is going to South America to catch snakes, and that old bus. And every day after school, the kids would be over there, and they were helping me sand it down and get it ready to go. And Mike brought me a couple of gallons of submarine primer paint from Key West. We repainted this gleaming, beautiful white, and took all the seats out, put them in my grandmother's basement, put in a rug, put in one of my friends, his father was an interior decorator at Sears, and he came over and helped me put in a partition and a closet and water storage, and I built a big bank of snake cages in the back for all the snakes I was going to catch. And on the 4th of July, 1967, I headed for South America in a Rio bus. And I made it as far as Costa Rica and caught a lot of snakes and had a wonderful time and learned a lot. But on the adventure, I was in El Salvador for a while, and this gentleman offered me $11,000 for the bus. And I thought, wow. But I didn't want to sell it. I had no desire to sell it. But as the trip finally culminated and ended, and I ended up back in Miami, very soon I was not bored, but I was missing the adventure of the road. And I started thinking about the $11,000. And so I had to redo the brakes on the bus. I got it all ready to go again, and I put the seats in the back, tied them back in there, and I headed back down to sell the bus to this guy for $11,000. I thought, well, I'll get a plane ticket, I'll fly back, get another bus, fix it up. You know, I was thinking I could do this for a while. But when I finally got down there and I found the guy right away, he didn't have any money. And I ended up living on the streets of El Salvador for about 3 months with nothing.
Oh, my
And the only thing that saved me were the people. And so I was in the capital, San Salvador, and I was parked on a street corner. And there were some students. They were night students, and they would stop by the bus every night on their way to school, and they would spend like a half hour teaching me to speak Spanish. And then they would stop half hour on their way home, and they would do it again, and I started learning Spanish. And in the meantime, I found a guy who had a taxi cab company, and he wanted to buy the bus. Long story short, I didn't like this guy either. But I ended up selling it to him for $400, which was exactly 1,000 colones in Salvadoranian money at the time, which gave me enough money to go. And here's what happened. There was a thing I left out, and that was when I was so destitute, I found this letter at some point, but I took a paper bag and I made an envelope and a letter, and I wrote my family a letter, you know, telling them the trouble I was in. And I got a post office box in San Salvador, and I sent the letter out. And nothing happened. And one day I was sitting in this little canteen, and I'm looking through like a hole in the wall. It's like 10:30 in the morning, and I'm in the sun, and that capital city was like, just like radiated, oh man, just woo, you know, it blew your eyes out. And I'm looking through a little hole in the wall, and I'm looking out onto the street, and a taxi cab stops right in front of where I'm looking, and my friend Doug Kirchen is getting out of this taxi cab. And he's got money, and not only that, he's got on a shirt and a tie and slacks. I'm like, what happened? You know, am I hallucinating? Anyway, what had happened was my grandmother got the letter, and she called him to her bedside, gave him money, plane ticket, said, go down there and find out what happened to George. So while he was down there, he finally had to go home because he was in school, and he was going to college. I think he was at University of Florida at the time. Anyway, I gave him a letter for Bill Haast because when I was down on the coast, there was a little village, and they kept talking about sea snakes, and I just threw it out there. I said, would you like any sea snakes? And by God, I got a letter back, and it was Bill Haast, and he said, yes, I'll take 50 sea snakes.
Whoa. So
as soon as I got the $400, the 1,000 colones, I headed down to the coast, and I started going out. There was 32 fishing boats from this little village, Acajutla, and they would go out every morning, and the crack of dawn, they would fish all day, come in and sell their fish on the dock. Well, I started going out with them, seeing if I could, you know, they were the guys that were telling me about the sea snakes. Well, I never caught one. But every once in a while, one of the boats would come in. They were terrified of these snakes. Every once in a while, a boat would come in, and it would have one or two, and I got some plastic containers, and I was living in a little shack on the beach, and I was trying to keep these snakes alive. And the funny thing was, within 2 or 3 days, they would get something growing on their back. You know, the yellow-bellied sea snake has that, you know, that golden yellow belly, and then the top is jet black. And they would start getting stuff growing on their backs, and I was trying to figure out how to keep them alive. And I stopped going out with them because all I was getting was seasick, and they didn't, you know. I remember one time I was laying in the bottom of the boat, and they throw a baby tiger shark on me to sober me up, you know, to get me straight, you know, which worked for a minute. Anyway, all of a sudden one day I was sitting on a rock by the beach, and I heard this little kid. He's coming from way down at the dock. He said, Jorge, culebras, you know, Jorge, snakes. And I go down there, and these fishermen had filled up the bottom of their boat with sea snakes. I guess they ran into one of those big rafting bunches of these sea snakes, and they had. So I thought they were going to kill me because I had offered them 50 cents a piece for these snakes, and I looked here and I said, I can't afford this, you know. But they were happy that I paid for the 50. We let the rest go. An old woman helped me make a wicker basket and sew shelves in there, and I laid my 50 sea snakes in there like sausages. It was a big basket, and then I put a handle on it, and I headed for the airport while these snakes were fresh. And I got to the airport in San Salvador, and when I got up to the ticket counter, they wouldn't let me. The woman said, no, we can't let those snakes on the plane. I guess I don't remember what I said, but I must have told her
I've seen this movie
about the snakes. And she put me on the telephone. I was standing there at the ticket counter. She put me on the telephone with the president of TACA Airlines. And I made my case for her and everything. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Van Houten. We cannot let those snakes on the plane." So anyway, here now I'm down on the floor, right? I look open the bag. I'm looking at my snakes. I'm thinking, well, I wonder if I have enough money in my pocket to go get drunk in the airport bar. What am I going to do? And all of a sudden, I heard the voice of Elvis Presley. "Hey, son, what's the matter?" And I look up, and here is Elvis Presley. Well, it wasn't Elvis Presley, obviously, but it looked kind of like him. He was in a pilot's uniform, and he was the pilot for that flight. He was from South Carolina, and he worked for TACA Airlines. And my guess is, which is a pretty good guess, that the president of the airline called him, the pilot, said, "You make the call." So he said, "Let me see those snakes." And he looked at me. "Come with me." I close it up, and I get in. He walks me out to the tarmac. There was a ladder going up to the cargo bay. He said, "Put your snakes up in there and get on the plane," just like that. And the next thing I knew, I was in Miami, and I called my mother. She picked me up, drove me out to the Serpentarium, and here I was with Bill Haast, and he was ready. He had these containers and phony seawater. We mixed it up, and we put 50 sea snakes in 50 containers and got them all set up. And as I was leaving, he said, "How would you like a job?" This is my dream, right? I looked at him. "Yes, sir." He said, "Uniforms and $10 a day." I said, "Sold." And right then I started working for Bill Haast.
Wow.
And the funny thing was, about 3 or 4 months later, a guy who very few people know anymore, hear about, is Marlon Perkins. He had the old Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
And he came to the Serpentarium one day. And he came over and talked to me for about 15 minutes. I think Bill Haast told him to say something to me because, we were getting along good, and I was working hard there. But at the end of the conversation, he looked at me and said, "I assume you're going to college while you're working here." And I said, "No, sir, I'm not." And boy, he lit into me. He said, "If you're going to stay in any aspect of biology or work with these animals and make that a career," he said, "you're going to need a good education or you're going to have a really tough time." And he just really... But about 5 days later, I went down and signed up again to Miami-Dade. But this time, I had a fire. And I finished college about 3.5 years after that. I graduated from Florida Atlantic University, and I had secured that little piece of land where I have the Serpentarium from an old dairy farmer who had gone in the real estate business. And that was 50 years ago.
It was 50 years ago that he hired you.
Pardon?
It was 50 years ago he hired you?
No, 50 years ago that I graduated and came to St. Cloud. I started,
Wow.
as of this past June, it makes 50 years that I've been on the site there. I graduated in June of
Wow.
72, left my apartment, put all my stuff. I had 30 snakes, put them in the car, and headed for St. Cloud.
And how many
Wow.
snakes do you have now?
And I had a piece of land, but that's all I didn't know anything else. I didn't know. I thought you had a piece of land, you do what you want. You build a thing, you make a thing, right?
How many do you have there now, George?
Probably I don't know. There were times we had way too many. We still have way too many. But I would say on the Venom line now, in the neighborhood of 300 to 400. Then we got another 100 or so out for exhibit and, breeders.
How many different species do you think you have there?
Well, I know we have at least 52 in our exhibit setups. We have 52 exhibits, and then, in addition, I would say probably in the neighborhood of 80 different species. Maybe.
Okay, so here's a question for you. In all the years and all the places you've traveled, number one, what was your favorite place to travel and go catch snakes at? And number two, what's been your favorite snake to work with?
Boy, that's a hard question.
Oh, it's hard.
I would say, I don't know.
There ever a place you went to one time you wish you could have went back to again and never had a chance to?
Well, one place I always wanted to go back to. When I was in Vietnam, I got a 2-week R&R to Thailand, and I rented a motorcycle. And anyway, I went snake hunting over much of Thailand and caught a few snakes. And in fact, I brought a python back to my base camp in Vietnam, which was kind of a crazy thing. I ended up taking it home. That's a long story, too. You know, when I got to Camp Alpha and I was leaving Vietnam, I threw all my clothes away and I had a python in my duffel bag. And all of a sudden they're going around the room, they're looking in everybody's duffel bag. I'm thinking, oh, done. But somehow I made myself invisible. I'm really good at that. I practiced when I was in school. I didn't want anybody to ask me a question. I always tried to be invisible. And I learned how to sort of do that, like the shadow, you know. And they went around and they never looked at my duffel bag. Next thing I knew, I was on the plane, and we made a stop in Japan, and I was in San Francisco.
Your life should be a movie. This needs to be a movie.
Well, anyway, I'm writing a book.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to, because, you know, when you start running out of time, which I'm doing, you get to a point where you realize you need to get, you know, like the things I want to do, it's hard for me to do it and do the farm at the same time.
Right.
You know, you get a little bit of time, you start to write, and you get really into it, and then you have to stop. And then sometimes it's really hard to get back there. So I'm hoping I'm looking for like a cabin, you know, a simple place. I want a place that doesn't have any cars, automobile. That's going to be impossible, but I want a little cabin, you know, a nice kitchen, a nice bedroom, a little living quarters, a bedroom, or maybe a little tiny guest room, a garden, a good sound system. I want beautiful music, and so I can sit and do my writing and, you know, other things. I want a bicycle.
In the Serpentarium world, or in the world of herpetology, what do you think a couple of your biggest accomplishments were? Because I know you got tons of them.
I haven't done much of anything. I mean, we've been on some really good projects with people that, you know, I've gotten to do some cool stuff. I got to work at the Salk Institute in the neurobiology lab on a Venom project there.
Can you tell us, speaking of that, you know, I know that's part of your world. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of Venom in the advancement of human health?
Well, I'll give you one example of a project I was on. I was working with this guy, Ralph Loring. He was in Dr. Zygmun's lab that was at Harvard. It was the Harvard neurobiology lab, and they had detected something that it had many different names, but I stick with the name neuronal bungarotoxin. It comes from the little crate that's found on Taiwan. It's a very toxic venom, but the thing is, when they found this, it's a very minor component, and nobody could figure out how to clean it up and get it pure. And what it does, which I could see no reason that a snake would have it, but you know how cobra toxin blocks synaptic, where it blocks the receptor protein on the muscle side of the synapse,
right.
So that's how you become paralyzed with most cobra bites. Well, this does the same thing, but it does it in neuronal tissue, where it's a nerve connection in the brain. And the beauty of these things is they can label them with I-125, iodine-125. It's an isotope, and they can see it. You know, they can take this they called it kappa bungarotoxin or neuronal bungarotoxin. And they can attach I-125 to that, and they can put it in the system, and like you put it in somebody's system, and all of a sudden they can look at it, and they can look at synaptic sites in brain tissue, which, you know, let's say you're studying Alzheimer's or something, you can sort of see things going on at the synapse. That's a pretty good thing.
Say if it can take them away, then that chances are that if they can reverse engineer that, maybe they can get that venom to give those synapses back action again.
Well,
there's all kinds of options.
There's a lot
there.
of possibilities there.
That's pretty.
And the other thing is, like alpha cobra toxin, one of the most common neurotoxins on our planet, was used to isolate and identify the structure of receptor sites at the neuromuscular junction. What they did is they homogenized the synapse, and then they put this stuff in there, and that binds to that, and then they were able to purify and get, pure receptor protein, and then from there they could actually determine the structure of receptor protein. That was a good one. But there's many things. There's so many things that I don't even, that I don't know about. A lot of blood chemistry work. Oh, God, snake coagulants and anticoagulants. Ooh.
I got bit by a blue garter snake the other day, and I forgot that blue garter snakes have an anticoagulant in their bite. So I got bit by this blue garter snake, and I'm bleeding all over the place. And I went, man, I forgot that they have an anticoagulant in their.
I think there's many snakes that have that. And,
yes, sir.
I got bitten by so many non-venomous snakes when I was a kid. And now I'm allergic to something in non-venomous snake saliva, because
Really?
anytime a non-venomous snake bites me, man, I get the itch. I mean, it's worse than worse than a mosquito bite. It's just or
Interesting.
Or a deer fly.
Yeah.
I don't like to get bitten by anything anymore.
Well, Bill always likes to say, Frank, we've spent our entire career trying not to be bit by things. Stop letting things bite you. I'm like, well, Uncle Bill, I ain't doing it on purpose.
Yeah,
I'm not
right.
letting things bite me on purpose. Just sometimes it happens. Yeah.
No, well, I was always, I'm never,
Nobody likes to take a snake bite of any kind.
No, I don't like trauma. I don't like any kind of trauma. And I've never been brave. But the only reason I do this is because I just love the animals and I love the work. And, I grew up listening to Bill Haast's wife talk about the horrors of snake bite, and I was never going to get bit by a venomous snake. But I'll tell you something, and I think this is a very true thing. Anytime human beings get involved in anything, I don't care what it is, if there's the slightest element of danger and they do it repetitiously, something bad is going to happen.
All it takes is one easy moment of being complacent or slipping up, or that animal doing something a little bit different than they normally do.
Well,
it's more than just us.
This is something I've realized over the years. Snakes are athletes in their own realm.
Yes, they are.
They can do things that you can't even imagine they can do until you see them do it. And the thing is, most snakes never try. So you work with snakes and you work with snakes, and all of a sudden you get that hard fighter. I talk about hard fighters because I have a rattlesnake at the Serpentarium now named Geronimo. We named him after the Apache, who I read killed over 50 men in battle trying to keep us out of his country. And it didn't work out too well for old Geronimo. But that's this rattlesnake. He just wants to go home. He just wants peace. I tell people the story all the time. When I started out, I was not the same person I am now. I mean, people call me to a home now. They have a rattlesnake in their yard. Oh my God, And I make them send a picture so I know it's a rattlesnake before I go.
It's very important, yes.
But anyway, I walk out in the yard, and I'm walking in the yard, and I look down, and here, at the base of a tree or under a bush is this beautiful rattlesnake. But now I'm looking at that snake, and I know I'm looking at a refugee. I'm looking at an animal that we have destroyed his habitat, destroyed his home, probably killed most of his friends and family. And somehow he got away. He's out there, and he's trying to find a place to live in peace. That's all he's doing, And then he bumps into one of us, and, most of the time that's not going to work out too well for the old rattlesnake. And these are the things that over time, as you realize, the reality of the world, you just, I try to keep a positive outlook, but it's
hard,
it's
isn't it?
hard.
Yeah, it's hard. So, George, what is the address of your place over there? On 192, what's the address of the Reptile World Serpentarium?
The actual address?
Yeah, the actual address.
It's 5705 East Erlo Bronson Memorial Highway.
And so if you guys have never been over the Reptile World Serpentarium, it's a beautiful place. I don't even have the words to really describe how great it is. They have all the non-venomous snakes there. They have venomous snakes to look at from around the country and around the world. You do a reptile show twice a day?
We have our Venom programs at noon and 3. Except September, we go to kind of a weird schedule because everybody's taking their vacations in September. But you can call us, our normal schedule is every day but Monday. We're closed on Mondays. We have our public exhibits open from 10 to 5, and we run our Venom programs at noon and 3.
Yeah, if you've never been over there and watched Mr. George work up a cobra or a water moccasin or a diamondback, it'll change your entire world. It'll change if you have a fear of these snakes,
Yes.
watching him work with these things.
Yes, I do.
There's nothing wrong with that. They're meant to have a healthy fear of them. But if you have that kind of fear, and you're watching someone like George work with them, it'll really change your entire aspect, your entire view of the animal. In my opinion, it just.
Well, I try to, the program is a 2-part thing. We give them a good. We gave them a good discussion on our work, and I always try to relate our work to, well, I spend a lot of time talking about conservation and wildlife protection, which we don't have now.
Right.
That's another thing that is distressing to me, because we have a huge bureaucracy of people that are supposedly supposed to protect our wildlife, and it seems like all they do is complain about the non-native wildlife rather than protecting the stuff that's already here. It's very confusing to me.
We talked about that one day about the everything's exotic or invasive, but really they're not anymore. Once they have a group of them that are here to stay, they're kind of, it's no longer an exotic anymore.
Well,
it's
once
part
they're
of the
here,
wildlife.
they're here,
Yeah.
just like us. I
Right.
always tell people, they talk about the nuisance species that we have in Florida, and I say, you want to see the worst nuisance species? When you get up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth, look in the mirror. That's the worst. If we would leave Florida, the wildlife would take care of itself. We'd be fine.
Yes, sir. You're not wrong.
But
You're not wrong. But George, I can't thank you enough for being here with us today. And like I was telling everybody, if you have the opportunity to make it to St. Cloud, it's a very short trip from the Space Coast. If you live down by in Melbourne, Vieira, or Palm Bay, jump on 192 and you're there in 30 minutes. If you live up here in the north end of the county, it's a 45-minute ride that you and your family will never forget. And next thing you know, you'll be going there and visiting the place every couple of months and going and seeing George. You're a resource to our community and our state and our country and our world, George, and we really appreciate you. I can't tell you how much it means to me and to us that you're here with us talking to us about this stuff. It's things that it's part of wild Florida that nobody gets to hear about. These are things that nobody gets to experience anymore.
Well, I appreciate you having me on your program, and I will say I thank people when they come to the Serpentarium, if they do the full experience and get the program, you will learn something, and you'll see some wonderful animals, and and it's pretty exciting. It's for me still, it's still just being there working makes my day every day. So
that's
I've been fortunate, and I appreciate what you've said, and I thank you for having me on your program today.
That passion, everybody sees it too, buddy. It's one of the beautiful things about you, my friend. Honest to goodness, it's your family to my family. I know you know that, but we care about you and what you do. So thank you for
I
thank you for being
appreciate
here.
it, and that's a mutual affection, so to speak.
I appreciate it, sir. Well, guys, thank you for tuning into this episode of the EEARSS Podcast. Thank you, Mr. Horn, for being here. Cindy, Bill, you guys are awesome, as always. And on to next week, I reckon, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, guys, we'll catch you all next week. Bye-bye.